Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We had originally intended for this to be an intimate little discussion in a small room at Carnegie. And so, as you can see, we have failed in our first objective. The conference has grown and grown because the interest in the subject is so significant. As Bill suggested, infrastructure is not simply an issue of domestic politics. It's not simply a local issue. It's not simply an issue of filling potholes. It's an issue of national competitiveness, of the future of economic development in the country. All you need to do is think back to the 1950s when Dwight Eisenhower built and expanded the American highway system and look at his rationale, which was that this was central to American national security as well as to America's expansion and economic well-being. And you understand the complexity and the centrality of the issues we're discussing here today. Normally, some of you may know me as the CEO and editor of Foreign Policy magazine, but for many years now, I've also been affiliated with Carnegie as a visiting scholar. The past 6 years, I've been the head of the Bernard L. Schwartz program in growth and competitiveness policies. And it is a special pleasure to be involved in that program, which looks at international interests from the perspective that American strength begins at home. It's all possible due to the support of Bernard L. Schwartz. And I can tell you, Bernard has been incredibly nurturing in the course of those past 6 years. And also has been at an arm's length. He hasn't been at any of our events. This is the first event that Bernard has joined us at, and I'm very proud and pleased that he is here for this particular discussion. I think it underscores the importance. I also think what underscores the importance is the incredible high level of the distinguished group of discussants that you see in front of you here, who you will hear from throughout the day. Our structure is that of a high-level conversation, of looking for solutions in the area of infrastructure to move us past 35,000-foot pronouncements and into what is achievable in filling an amazingly important gap, a very large gap that we all face as a country. The conversation is going to break into three main pieces. First, we're going to talk about defining the gap. Next, we're going to talk about the best ideas for achieving the closure with regard to that gap. And finally, we're going to talk about how do you bring those ideas into reality in the context of the current political context. Because at the end of the day, we want to produce a kind of a blueprint that says this is achievable. This is what we can actually do, not to talk pie in the sky, but to actually talk about concrete steps that we can move forward towards. In order to do this, in addition to having this discussion, and I'll come back after we hear some opening remarks here and talk to you a little bit more about how our interactive format works for this discussion, we also have some distinguished speakers who will provide us with important perspectives throughout the day. This includes later in the morning the Vice President of the United States, and immediately before the Vice President, Senator Elizabeth Warren. But to kick us off and to frame this discussion, we're extremely fortunate to have somebody who has a unique set of perspectives that go from the innermost workings of the White House at the highest levels to the Congress and how things actually can get done in the context of the Congress, to the day-to-day management of one of America's leading cities and addressing infrastructure from the perspective of somebody who has to see it both strategically and down to the pothole level. And there aren't many people in America who can do this. Few can do it with the kind of vision or eloquence that our first speaker can. Please join me in welcoming the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel.
Thank you, David. It's introductions like that, you really wish your parents were here. You know your mother would be proud and your father would be amazed. I was just talking on the side, rudely, obviously, while David was doing the innermost sanctum of the White House. It's like on Yom Kippur, the Holy of Holies. But I want to say one other thing. I apologize up front. If you didn't know, the Chicago Cubs actually clinched their ability last night with a fabulous 4-0 in Pittsburgh. And the mayor's not 25. He was up to midnight last night. So if I slur, I have an excuse. And I was at a local bar, so I apologize up front. And I'm breaking news. At 55, you are not 25. That's all I can tell you the next morning. So let me try to address this in the context of how we're trying to see it in the city of Chicago, what we're trying to accomplish in the city of Chicago, and then put it in the context of what's going on in the sense of here in Washington and efforts. And we were talking, Ambassador Burns and I, just a second ago. I basically, on a macro level, and then dive down to Chicago, I do not, internationally, I do not think the United States has anything to fear from around the world. It's us we have to fear in the sense of our economic competitiveness going forward. And investing in our infrastructure and our physical capacity, you cannot have a 21st century economy moving on a 20th century foundation. It's not possible. And that's what's happening here. And when I became mayor, given transportation, given Chicago's central point, not just geographically, but basically about a third of all cargo, whether it runs on runways, rail, or roads, comes in and out of the city of Chicago. Sometimes we never let it out, but it definitely comes to the city of Chicago. And our ability to compete globally it means we have to invest. And I was not going to let Chicago to be held hostage by a breakdown in politics, either in Springfield, Illinois, or in Washington, D.C. And the effort I did, and let me just say this, the last 2 years, Chicago's the #1 city for corporate relocations in America. And just last week, we announced again that ConAgra is leaving Omaha and bringing their world headquarters to the city of Chicago. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but one of the primary factors for 2 years running, not only the #1 city for corporate relocations, we're up to 38 companies that have relocated their North American or international headquarters to the city of Chicago. It is also the fastest growing central business district in the United States to date. 2 reasons or 3 reasons primarily. IBM did a study of 100 cities across the globe, their competitiveness, Economist magazine as well, A.T. Carnegie. Chicago always lands as the second most competitive economy in North America, and either 9th, 8th, or 7th based on those 3 studies worldwide. I happen to agree with the one that calls it 7th. That's the privilege of being a mayor. But all of them conclude the same reasons. 35 to 36% of the people in the city of Chicago have a 4-year college degree or better in the educational institutions we have, and it's the #1 city for kids. When they get a degree in college, 4-year degree, they come to the city of Chicago. And I can go on at length of that. The second reason, though, is that because of our aviation system and our transportation system, you can get anywhere in the globe, anywhere in the United States or North America, directly multiple times a day. It has a huge strategic advantage for the city of Chicago. And that also not just that, but our public transportation is the second largest system in the United States. Now, by context, to give you a way to think about it, more people take the Chicago public transportation system in a single month than take all of Amtrak nationwide all year. That's how big it is. I take it twice a week to work. Door to door, from my home to the office, 30 minutes. By this December, it will be the first system that has 4G completely throughout the system. No employee will be able to tell their employer, I couldn't get your email done. They're going to hate me at the end of this process. But I thought basically from schools, parks, airport, to public transportation, to our water system, I'll lay out what we've done and what I think Washington can do to help a city stay competitive even while it is broken as a political system in addressing the investments in what I consider 21st century upgrades and capacity. So I start with our public transportation system, as I told you the extent of it, and it's a huge advantage for the city of Chicago. So as a net result, we're investing over the last 4 years going forward, $5.5 billion. 40 of our stations will be totally rebuilt, top to bottom. Second is about half the track on the system will be totally replaced. 3 years ago, I shut down the Red Line South in the city of Chicago. Shut it down for 5 months. replaced all 11 and a half miles of track, and every station got fixed in the system. The train used to go at 15 miles an hour. It now moves at 55 miles an hour. Every train car and every bus will either be new or totally rebuilt and completed by 2019. And in that system, not only is it 4G, and as I told you, the stations as well, but also the track and the system in there. When I became mayor, about 56% of the people were taking buses and about 44 were taking trains. I would venture, if you look around the United States, we're now 55-45 train bus. The only bus system that's growing are the nonstop buses. This fall, I'll open up from the Western Loop to Michigan Avenue, on Washington and on Madison. The bus rapid transit system is about 2-mile system. Buses will be their own lane, cars will be their own lane, bikes will be their own lane, and pedestrians will have obviously an extended sidewalk on either side. And it will basically, what used to be, take about 7 minutes off that commute. We're now redoing the blue line from the airport into downtown. What's now 45 minutes will go down to 32 minutes. And we're taking that time off and fixing the stations along the route. Without going through the whole list, but to give you examples why this is crucial, we opened up on the western end of the loop, or business district, called Morgan train Station. It's in our kind of area where Google's now putting 1,200 employees in development. Prior to opening that train station 3 years ago, there were about 3 or 4 real estate deals at about $47 a square foot. There have been a couple hundred deals. The last deal, which was about 2 months ago, was at $345 a square foot by an individual from New York, more expensive property than Michigan Avenue in the city of Chicago. That is not possible if it hadn't been for that train station. And you can look at the point on the calendar and see the before and after, because it opened up a part of the area. And that's also true, to tell you the truth, in other parts of the city where we've opened up either public transportation, and in this area, in a couple months from now, I'll be opening up the first new bike garage on the west side of the city of Chicago, where you'll be able to not only rent a space, shower, locker, and invest in that area, continuing unlocking economic opportunity that could not happen without that. Tomorrow, we'll cut the ribbon and we'll have added 100 miles of protected bike lanes throughout the city of Chicago in the last 4 years. And it's not an accident that the first mile of a protected bike lane we did 4 years ago is on Kinsey, is exactly where now you can't get real estate in the merchandise market because of all the tech companies that have moved to the city of Chicago. So critical investments in your public infrastructure unlock huge economic opportunity in a city that cannot happen from a transportation standpoint without it. Second, our water project. I say this, but water, we have an unbelievable lake, but we were breaking pipes, 3,200 pipes a year were busting. There were parts of our system, not only built 100 years ago, that were literally trees, were water pipes. So I raised rates to address it. Within this decade, 900 miles of water pipe, everything 100 years or older, will be totally replaced. 670 miles of sewer, either relined or replaced. 167,000 catch basins, totally rebuilt top to bottom. 2 largest water filtration plants in the world, also rebuilt in the system. At the end of 2019, we will save 2 years worth of residential water usage that we used to lose to leakage, will be saved and preserved. Water is the biggest and most important commodity going forward, and Chicago's investing in that future. Over the decade, 18,000 people will go to work rebuilding that system. And that doesn't count, because once you rip up the road, we repave it. So every year we're repaving 300 miles of road in the system. When I became mayor, we were doing 175. We now do 300 a year when we put all the resources together, different accounts. And that allows us, we have 4,200 miles of road. My first term, we did 1,200, and we're on schedule for 1,600 to 1,500 in this term. So about half of the roads in the city of Chicago will be 8 years or less. Third is our parks and our playgrounds. I know some people don't consider that critical. Just so you know, by 2018, every child in the city of Chicago will be within a 10-minute walk of a new park or a playground in the city of Chicago. Some will have to walk a very fast 10 minutes, but they will get there. We've added 1,000 acres of parkland, and every playground standalone in the city of Chicago, 325 are totally being rebuilt. We've taken an old railroad track, 606, made it 15 acres of parkland. We've actually taken an old airport in the downtown area. We've turned that into a 50-acre nature preserve. And in addition to that, what I'm also proud of is we invested in a new river walk in the city of Chicago because I pledged 4 years ago we're going to create a second waterfront for the city of Chicago. Example, from the day I announced the Riverwalk, not opened it, announced it, $8.5 billion of private development along the riverfront. China's largest investment in real estate, a 5-star hotel and condos, is right there on the Riverwalk with the area. We've also invested, 3 are open, a 4th to come, which is new boathouses along the river for canoeing, kayaking, and sculling to create the river as the next recreational frontier of the city of Chicago. These are examples of what I'm trying to give you of the investments. And in my budget that I submitted 3 weeks ago and will be voted on October 28th, I've activated a new fee for school modernization. We will eliminate overcrowding in the city of Chicago, and it's a property tax levy to do school modernization throughout the system where we have overcrowding in the city of Chicago. We will be adding additions that have computer rooms, library rooms, lunch rooms, classrooms, science rooms, so there will be actually a modern 21st century facility for the city of Chicago, allowing us to not only handle overcrowding, but then complete the project that Chicago's talked about since 1963, putting air conditioning in every classroom in the city of Chicago. I want children focused on their teachers, not on the temperature. And because our rooms are not air conditioned, a lot of times during the beginning of the school year and towards the end of the school year, they're actually, windows are open and they can't focus on what the teacher is saying. And then at the airport, finally, we are building new runways, as you know, at O'Hare. But to give you a context, where I have one more, we're going to open a runway in about 3 months, and we have one more to go. It's the equivalent of the runways, not just realigning it. You have to think of it as we are literally taking the capacity of Midway Airport and moving it to the city of Chicago. It is the only city presently building a 3rd airport. And our ability to continue to invest in the efficiency of moving people in the city of Chicago, whether from home to work or from the office to the airport or back, allows us to stay as a city. And I also noted the top 10 rankings that I mentioned to you. Chicago is the only city in that top 10 ranking that is not the nation, either financial or political capital. Yet it is in the world top 10 rankings. Our skilled workforce and our transportation system allows us to stay that competitive, and we could not afford not to invest it. Now, my one challenge is to Washington is while you have your dysfunction, don't let it spread to 2 accounts. And they're going to debate a gas tax or not. One is an account, if you don't know it, you should. It's called TIFIA. We're building in 95th Street on the Red Line South, the 2nd largest use system in the city with a TIFIA loan. The trains and buses that I talked about being replaced, a TIFIA loan. The Riverwalk on the city of Chicago, a TIFIA loan. The government gives you a 30-year loan on a lower interest rate than you normally get. The United States has an infrastructure bank. It's called TIFIA. We have done 5 or 6 projects that I've given you value that have created economic value outside of the investment. The investment in the Riverwalk is $98 million. We have to pay it back over 30 years. I already have an $8 billion private investment to go with it. And I can give you that chapter and verse. If you don't want to actually raise the fees, we did that with the taxis that do architectural tours on the river of the city of Chicago, with retail. If you don't want to in Washington, I'll take the political pressure for that, but keep this loan program going. They have actually dramatically cut back on a very successful program. It's called TIFIA. You don't have to create a bank. You don't have to think about it. It's right there. I feel bad saying this because now that you said it, somebody in Washington is going to go try to screw it up even worse. So it's like, shh, don't let anybody know that we did that. The second is an account called RIF. So TIFIA is very great. I've given you projects we've used it from River to our single car rental facility at O'Hare to the 95th Street train station to buying new buses and trains for the city of Chicago. So it's multiple purpose. Second is an account called RIF. Did you know presently there's $35 billion in that account? Only one system, which is in Denver, their Amtrak station, has been able to access it. So if TIFIA is a good account that they've now pulled back, they have an account called RIF that they won't let any money out. So we have a Union Station in the city of Chicago. More Amtrak trains come to that station than any other system in America. Metra, which is a suburban rail system into the city, goes into Union Station. The blue line from the airport that I talked about that then goes west goes into a block from that station. The new bus rapid terminal I'm putting in the city of Chicago is right there. There's a hub of transportation options that do not exist anywhere else in the United States. The real estate value around Union Station is fighting below its weight class from office, hotels, and capacity because the system doesn't work. Yet there's an account specifically built for that modernization that is so tight and difficult to warrant because they won't let economic development to be a consideration. In a city looking to invest in infrastructure, there's an account with $35 billion. And nobody, you can look at it, it's collecting about 0.01 interest on U.S. Treasury, but you can't touch it. You can stare at it. That's it. Philadelphia, they want to do the same thing Chicago wants to do. New York, the tunnels between New Jersey that are in New York, they want to use the RIF account. Nobody can access it because the words economic development have to be a consideration. And I can give you chapter and verse, every city can. From the Morgan Station at Fulton Market to the Riverwalk in the Central Business District to what we've done on bike lanes, where an investment in infrastructure unlocks private sector economic development. And I'll close on this, and I say this all the time, and I say this to a lot of business leaders here. You all challenge all the time as it relates to tax rates. Taxes is not an economic strategy. Obviously, nobody wants them higher than they need to be. As I often say to companies when I'm recruiting you, here, we don't have a corporate tax rate in the city of Chicago. But if we did, I'll make it 0, but none of your employees can use O'Hare. How's that economic strategy for you? How's that tax rate working for you? Here, you'll give you a corporate rate 0 for 5 years, but you can't recruit out of Booth, Kellogg, or any of the other schools in the city of Chicago. This is a crazy argument. Nobody needs to pay more than they should. But if you do not invest in a 21st century infrastructure, your economy will move at the speed of your infrastructure. We have a 20th century infrastructure. That's the speed. Cities are where the economic, intellectual, and cultural energy of the world economy is. Chicago is one of those. The reason I made the political will to do what we needed to do to make these investments, because I am not going to hold Chicago hostage to the political and economic dysfunction of the United States federal government. That is not the tenure I want to have. It is part of our history, and it's going to be our future if we have the political will to invest in it, and that's what we're doing. And trust me, I'm proud of what we've done, but it is woefully short of what we need to do. It would be great to have a partner in either Washington or Springfield. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.